Hello, hello. Welcome back to episode 3 with Valhalla Bound. You've got Basic Jason and Bearded Joe coming in a little later than normal, but here nonetheless for a podcast. I'm excited for this one. We're touching again on arboreal species and things that we're personally working with. We do have shows coming up. We have just come off the tail end, which is partially why this one's a little later, of 3 shows in a row, back to back, and it was wild. But thank you everyone who came out to see us and see the animals that we brought. And we sold a lot of false water cobras. So I hope you guys are enjoying that podcast that we posted all about them. Thus far, everything that I'm getting back from people that we've talked to that received one, that they're all eating well and doing great, which makes me very happy that all of that's going well. The next show for us is going to be in February 24th and 25th, and it is the big one in Tampa. Really excited about that. So come out and see us. We may be pushing some new social media stuff and trying things out on that end to see if we can help grow that. That is part of the reason that we're doing this. But we also may have some special things in the works. So definitely come and check us out, guys. So today, me and Jason were talking about it and trying to throw back ideas of like what we wanted to talk about today. And I think what we've settled on is green tree pythons versus the emerald tree boa. And no, my friends, we are not going to be pitting them in a lunchbox and shaking them up to make them fight. That's not the goal of this podcast.
But
But
if
we
we did,
wanted
the
honestly, I think my money's on the emeralds. Honestly, just a bit more robust.
amen.
But that we wanted to go through and discuss some of the differences, like where they're found, the size differences, the care differences, and then our personal feelings about what we think, having worked with both species now. Jason, you have an emerald tree boa. I think
Yes,
mostly Amazons after that, correct?
correct. Yeah,
Okay. So you kind of have the real deal emerald, and then you've
yeah,
got the emerald light, right? The
yes.
Amazons, which honestly kind of fall more on the green tree python side, in the fact that Amazons come in and they feed way better. And I feel like that's kind of how, like, if we start talking about captives versus wild caught right off the bat, because most people who are going to a show or to a pet store and purchasing a green tree python, if we start with them, or even an emerald, they're going to end up with a wild caught specimen. It's just the cards that were dealt in the, I would say, hobbyist
Mm.
like realm of working with reptiles, is that you go to a pet store and you find something you like, or you look it up online and you find somebody who has it, and then you obviously, first thing anyone does when they're shopping is they look for the cheapest deal,
Yes.
right? Your cat is getting full like ninja warrior
She's
going
trying to get to
on
the
your
alcohol,
books.
man. She knows where the good stuff's at.
So when somebody goes to a pet store, they're going to look and they're going to see the pricing range change from when you're looking at corn snakes, king snakes, rat snakes, your standard like household pets. And then all of a sudden you hit the arboreal stuff and it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Hold on. That got exponentially more expensive, right? I've been doing this a long time. So I remember back in the day, I couldn't give away green tree pythons with an enclosure. Like, hey, you buy an enclosure, you get a green tree python. And I couldn't give them away. Now I've seen them come way up, anywhere from $300 or $400 fresh off the boat to like 1,000, maybe 1,200 even, for something that's a little more established. It's older, it's doing well, it's already had vet checks and things like that. I know that I've sold some that I kept for 8 months to a year, made sure that they had all of those things done, and then was able to retail them out and did move them for that price. So there's kind of a range there, but in the pet store, you're probably going to see $5.99, $6.99 for a young green tree python. Whether it's eating or not is debatable. Typically, I would say green trees come in and they like to eat. They don't usually turn down food, and you don't have as many difficulties on that end as the emeralds would. Have you had any experience with green tree pythons thus far?
I've been bit by yours, and
Nana is, she's a special one, isn't she?
that's it. You were like, change the water dish over there, and then you just like watched. Uh, the only thing that I noticed, the
That was my
bite,
test to see if you were going to make it.
yeah, the bite definitely isn't as bad as the emeralds,
Right.
and I think that I'll say right off the bat, the bite's not as bad, but handling was kind of similar.
Hmm.
It's a similar experience, but the bite was the only real thing that I noticed.
I feel like when there's two different approaches that they take, right? They're drastically different between the two when it comes to defending themselves, right?
Mm,
Because again, if we're talking about something that somebody's getting from a pet store or something somebody's getting from a show, most of the time we're dealing with an imported animal. And with that comes the fact that this animal was essentially kidnapped from his home and shoved in a box and sent somewhere else. And now he's going, what's happening? He's terrified. So obviously, there's going to be the defense that they're going to come off the bat trying to keep themselves safe because they're terrified, which all of that can be overcome. We've talked about that in some of our other podcasts before. But when a green tree python wants to defend themselves, it's very, I hesitate to use the word aggressive whenever I speak about a reptile because it is a defense thing. It's not that they're seeking us out to try and hurt us, but it's very much like a flail. Like they just start reaching out. They just start snapping at everything. Whether it's the heat light, whether it's your hand, whether it's the branch that you're moving, they just start reaching out and biting at things. I've noticed that emeralds kind of they wait and watch. They make those swings count. And so they'll kind of watch and wait and wait and wait, and they'll posture up and they'll look at your hand and they'll look like they're going to. But then when they do, they hit you with everything that they've got, right?
oh yeah,
So it's a much more muscular bite. I would say that emeralds are built more powerfully, and they don't call them Corallus caninus for nothing, right?
without question, they're built of a particular quality.
Right.
It's a thick snake. It's a strong snake. And the first thing I noticed when handling the green tree, now that I think back, was like it's a much softer experience.
Hmm.
You're like, oh, this doesn't feel quite as brutal as the emeralds do. And from
Not as
emeralds are all
muscular.
sinew,
Yeah.
just all muscle.
Yeah. So that there's that little bit of difference in their approach to defending themselves. Again, I hesitate to use the word aggression on any animal, but when they defend themselves, there's a different approach to it, right? Now, when we move into talking about that higher tax bracket payment of getting a captive bred animal,
All of this goes out the window
all of
and
that goes out the
changes.
window. You're not expecting that animal to bite you any longer. Not saying it can never happen, but I've been working with captive emeralds and some captive green trees. I did have success with one season in breeding them, which we'll discuss a little bit further about breeding later. And none of the other than fresh babies who are just like, please, for the love of God, don't eat me. They're not aggressive, they're not defensive, they're not nervous. They get really used to that captive routine fairly quickly. And so all of that goes out the window and you don't have to really worry about those things anymore. But I don't want to let somebody think that, oh, I'm just going to get this snake and it's going to act like every other snake, because even if you're getting it from a pet store, no matter what they tell you, I would put money down that this animal was wild caught from a wholesale distributor.
If it
Not
seems
that
like a
that
good
makes them
deal,
bad at all. What were you going to say?
if it seems like a good deal, you know that it's wild caught.
Right, 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 right. Talking about the pricing again, I've noticed that there's a little bit of a disparity
Mhm.
between the two. You were doing some research on that recently on the
Yeah,
pricing between
mostly the
green trees,
wilds. Yeah, so with
mostly
the
the
with the
wild
wild
caughts.
caughts, you're gonna spend on a green tree baby. If you're looking babies, the babies are gonna be about 350 to 600 for wild caught baby green
Mhm.
trees, and then
That's about what
emeralds are
I've
gonna
been
be
seeing,
600 to 1200 for wild caught babies.
even with wild caught.
Yeah, and we've talked about why it's harder to establish the green trees
Mhm.
because of their size. But then that rotates when you talk about captive or when you talk about wild caught adults. You can
Mhm.
get a wild caught emerald, juvenile, 2, 3 years old, $400,
Mhm.
$350.
Yeah.
You can't do that with green trees. You get to adult green trees and their wild caught ones are a grand. You could find some good deals, $600, but most of them are more expensive.
Right.
Whereas emeralds all day, every day, you can go on Morph Market and pull off a 350, $400 wild caught, very wild caught emerald
Yes.
and
Very
roll the
fresh.
dice.
Yeah. It makes them a little easier. And so I
Mm.
think there's been more people who have had the experience of purchasing a wild caught emerald.
Mm.
And without some of the foundational knowledge that I teach to my apprentices and even my clientele whenever they purchase an animal from me, or whether they purchase an animal from me or not, when somebody comes to me and wants to talk about emeralds versus green trees and they go, well, this guy's got an animal, essentially the same animal you have for half the price or a third of the price. And I would much rather educate them than be like, oh, well, go buy it from him. If he's got a better deal, go buy it from him. I say, okay, hey, that animal could be just as good as my animal. There's a possibility of that, however slight it may be. There's a possibility that you could get that animal and it could eat and it could not have any internal parasites and it could not have any external parasites and it could all be great. There is also a higher probability that the animal does have some internal parasites, which are easily treatable if you know the avenues of how to get the medicine, how to dose the medicine. If you have a vet that you can contact, that you can get that. Vets are not cheap for anything exotic related. It is quite expensive. I'm lucky enough to have a vet that's on retainer here with me, and so I have access to veterinary care for my animals when I do get wild ones in, or if I have something that gets sick.
Mm.
If I didn't have that and I had a sickness that ran through my entire collection, it could be devastating for me financially as well as emotionally because am I going to be able to afford to take care of all my animals, right?
Yeah, and
So
that's
when you go back to
uh,
dealing with just one, $150 to $250 vet visit just for them to look at your animal, that's if they're willing. A lot of times with these larger and more like, what's the word I'm looking for?
corporate.
Well, no, so snakes that have like a
Oh, the
stigma
snakes.
to them, right?
Yeah.
Even a false water cobra, like it has cobra in the name. And so vets will turn you straight down based on name alone. Then you start talking about emeralds and they have this conception that, oh, they're all mean and aggressive. I don't want that in my shop. And so they'll say, no, I don't do snakes. Even though they may see other species, they'll turn that one down just because they don't want any of the liability of having any of their staff members injured while on the job.
And it's a fair fear.
It's a fair fear when dealing with those wild caught animals, especially if you're having to do something invasive to it.
And you were just talking about the cost. You buy one for 350 bucks and you got a $250 vet bill,
And then the
and
medicine on top of that.
and then it dies and you have to buy another one and you're almost to the cost of a captive.
Right.
And
And
so
that's part
especially
of the
with
selling point that I use is that with my animals, they're established. Whether when I first started doing Valhalla, I didn't have a whole lot of capital. I was just starting out and I didn't have animals that were breeder ready yet, right? So what I would do is I would take my expertise from all the years that I've done reptiles and I would get these animals in from wholesalers and I would keep them. And there were losses amongst that. I would buy 5 or 10 of them at a time. Occasionally I would lose one or two of them. And that was part of the deal is that I would take those losses and I would establish these animals along the way and make sure that they were eating and making sure they were hydrated. And then once they were doing those things, then I got them clean of parasites and got them fed and taken care of with medications and things. It was almost a year process for each one of these animals. So there would be many shows that I would just come and educate people and show them the things that I was working with and the things that my breeders that I was growing up. And then at some point along the way, I would have extras. And so I would make those available. And they were for much more than what you would get your standard, but those were long-term care that I had kept for a certain amount of time that I could make sure were cleared medically. And then were also rock solid to go to somebody who may not have the experience needed to transition that animal from eating live random prey items, whether it was quail or chicks or something like that, and getting them converted over to frozen thawed rats, which is the most easily and readily available food source.
that's and we were talking about captive versus wild caught in this. If you're getting an established animal, it changes a little bit. We're
Mm-hmm.
talking mostly about like right off the boat, you get an import. With either of these species, you're rolling the dice a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's exciting to get a new animal, and so I think a lot of people see the cost that's $1,600, and they go, or $3,000 for a green tree that's fancy,
Mm-hmm.
and they go, I'm gonna roll it on a $400 one. And I understand. I've done it. I've done these things. I
Mm-hmm.
think we all kind of have.
Right.
but I think it can really set people up for disappointment, not just failure, just sadness of seeing an animal that you get, you love it, and it dies.
It can be
And there's
really
nothing,
disheartening and put
and there's
people
really
off to it entirely, an entire
maybe
species.
nothing you could have done about it. I
Right.
mean, we've all had that experience with wild caughts, and it's important to get wild caught animals in. This isn't a, a bash on wild caughts, but
Right.
if it's your first time getting into arboreals, I think we caution people against
Yeah.
that.
And I think that part of that plays into the aspect of they get these animals in. They're just as excited as I am. Anytime, even if I get a wild caught animal in, I'm stoked. If I get a captive animal in, I'm stoked. Any animal that comes into my house, it's like Christmas. But what do people want to do with these animals?
Touch it.
They want to touch it. They want to pull it out. They want it to be in a big, pretty enclosure up front and visualize. They want to
Mhm.
show it off to all their friends. Like that's an exciting thing in their life. Wild caught animals hate that shit.
Yeah.
A captive bred animal that only knows captivity, that has lived its entire life, is like, yep, it's Tuesday. On Tuesday, we have game night, and everybody's over here poking at me and staring in the glass. A wild caught animal goes, oh my God, I'm on the menu. And he freaks out. When you bring in these arboreal animals that spend their whole life up in the trees and hidden away from the world, and they don't want to be seen, and then you shove them in a box that basically puts them on display, a big glass enclosure or something, as pretty as that looks, and as much as it may be appropriate later on in that animal's life, when I get animals in, they go in a dark black tote with a light inside for day and night cycle, and I leave them the hell alone for months at a time. I do very minimal cleaning, very minimal like interaction. I let them feed on their own, and I don't interact with these animals because I want them to become established before I ever start trying to introduce the stress of interaction. And most people are not prepared to give the animal that time for them to effectively become part of the family and get used to human interaction. And
And
all of the added stress is really heavy on arboreals.
that's tough. And so it's hard to do. I don't even know if I could do it.
It's not
With a
easy.
So we talk about obviously going captive if you can. If you
Mhm.
have to go wild caught, established from a person a breeder. And then we talk about the care differences between them is kind of minimal in terms of not that there's not differences between the care, but if you can care for one reasonably, you can care for the other.
Right. I would agree with that.
There's not a massive change. Not one of them doesn't need this super odd enclosure. Similar enclosure. Temperatures are all manageable and easy
Mhm.
to get to. Humidity, very important.
Yeah.
Probably the biggest thing with arboreals. They all seem to want that humidity.
Yep. I keep my emeralds when we go back to, emerald versus green tree.
Hmm.
Care wise, not a whole lot of difference, right? I keep my green trees a little cooler than I keep the
Mhm.
emeralds, right around 82 to 85 at the hottest branch or perch inside their enclosure. My products that I use actually have a thermostat hole
Mhm.
built in the bottom of it so that I can run my thermostat directly into the branch that sits right underneath whether the heat source of whatever kind I have. That way I know this spot is 82 to 85, doesn't vary from that. And then the rest of the cage is down to room temperature of the office, which is 78 to 80 degrees. Which with the green trees, that's not a wide range, right? Um, Talking about back in the day when we used to get them in, we were like, all right, so quick dub into locality for green trees and emeralds, right? Green tree pythons are going to be from Papua New Guinea and the coasts of Australia and parts of Indonesia, right? So we look at the temperatures there and we're like, oh, gets hot there. 95 degrees, like can get to 100. And so back in the day, talking 15, 20 years ago, it was like, yeah, they need a hot spot about 95. They need heavy humidity. And we all have glass cages. Do you think any of us were able to maintain the humidity in an enclosure with a screen top at 95 degrees of a hot spot? Wasn't happening. So they all have difficult sheds. But in reality, where are those animals hanging out? Because they for sure aren't up at the top of the tree basking in the sunlight. They're not getting down on the ground sitting on a log basking. These animals are up in the cool air, hidden in the foliage, in the shade, hiding out. So if you look more so at where those animals are hiding, that 82 to 85 degree range, because it is hot over there, right, is more so going to be where they're hanging out. And that's honestly kind of just been trial and error for me, is getting them dialed into that and finding 95% of my green tree pythons just they do really well at that temperature. And also consulting with experts and things that who have been doing this far longer than I have been alive,
Yeah.
and just finding out that, hey, we just keep our room at 82 degrees. And so the cages are a tiny bit warmer than that in spots, and they'll keep a whole room ambient just with nothing but green trees. On the emerald side, I keep them a little warmer, especially if I'm breeding them and my females are going to be gravid and making babies. I'll bump that up to closer to like 90, maybe even 92, 93, depending on, how the animal's reacting. If they're sitting underneath that the whole time, I may bump it up even a little higher than that and give them the warmth so that they feel that they can move back and forth, because obviously
Yeah.
they're still trying to get warm even at that temperature. As long as they're not hiding on the cool side, I kind of let the animal tell me where they want to be. And those are the temperatures that I've noticed. Humidity, obviously high, like 70s and 80s. And I try to maintain that with the enclosures that I use, the tubs that I use, the totes that I convert over. It's pretty easy to maintain that with just mistings once or twice a week. And I just soak down the bedding. I don't soak the animal directly, but I will spray the back walls of the enclosure and kind of raise that humidity. And I've noticed based on my hydrometers that I have in the cage that there's a fluctuation enough that every 2 to 3 days I'll get in there and mist them, to
Mm.
maintain that for them. In a glass enclosure, you're going to find much more difficulty
Spraying
doing,
every day, twice a day.
spraying every day and trying to just keep that humidity. Be putting glass on the top, plastic, whatever you can. But like you were saying, as far as like rules and regulations, those temperatures and humidity, it's basically the same thing. Now they're from vastly different areas. Emeralds, if we're talking about them, they're going to be southern Suriname, Venezuela, Colombia,
Hmm.
Peru, Brazil. If we get into the basins, it's specifically from the Amazon basin itself, and they're actually considered their own species now.
Yeah, I didn't really want to compare them to the green trees as much because they just feel like an entirely different. Like we have them and they're huge
They're much
and
bigger.
they're all captive, born and bred, so
Yeah.
they're much calmer. And then we wanted to talk about temperament a little bit. We just go ahead and talk about captives. Very
Hmm.
similar temperament in my experience.
Yeah.
If they've been handled and socialized, it'll be fine. You
Right.
know, we don't have any captives that have ever caused us any issues, really. You know,
No,
it can
none of the
bite you.
captive ones that I've had. Again, if you get a tiny baby in who just
Yeah,
went through shipping and hasn't been reestablished in your collection, in your office or room or whatever
yeah.
you're in, you might be looking at having a bit more nervousness from the
Yeah.
animal. And again, all a part of that comes back to the how you interact with them, right? It's something that I preach is don't ever pull them off the branch. They don't want to fall.
No.
So following those simple things, wild caught or captive, is going to give you a better result in your interaction with them. But as far as captives, most of the time, once they've settled down, you can just pull them off the branch as long as you do it gently and you don't injure a small animal because
Yeah.
their spines are more sensitive. They tolerate that interaction much more,
I
whereas
think
a wild caught's going to be more nervous.
even with the wild caughts, we have one emerald that's like a little cantankerous,
My
maybe.
boy will pretty much, he's fine, and I can get him out and even get him off the branch. But when he's done with the handling process, when he's like, that's enough of that, that's when he starts to get anxious. He starts to move around a little faster, and then he'll start to look at me like he's getting ready to take a strike. And that's when it's like, all right, he's had enough, and I put him away.
And we talk about emeralds. We got those 4 emeralds in who were long-term captives, and we
Hmm.
probed them all and didn't get bit a single time.
Nope, not once.
And
And
I
for
mean
an
they were,
animal that has this reputation of just
yeah,
being violent and wild, out of pocket, for me to be able to stick a metal probe where the sun doesn't shine and not restrained,
yeah.
not aggressively handling them or pinning them down
No,
or
I just
tickling
held it
them.
while you did it, and we didn't have a single bite. And I was really getting ready for it. I was like, we are gonna get peppered today, and we didn't. I was truly surprised. I'm like, and these are wild caught established animals.
Right.
So temperament wise, I haven't seen a big issue. I will say because we've done the emeralds and the green trees, the breeding process. It,
Significant difference. That's where the big delineation starts, right?
yeah,
Where they're very similar. They're very similar. If you can take care of one, you can take care of the other. And then you get to breeding, it's like, yeah, people who can breed emeralds, cannot necessarily breed green trees. And people who can breed green trees are freaking unicorns. And if you're out there and you want to teach me the magic trick, just I'll give my phone number. I don't care. Whatever it is.
Hey, we got a success. You got babe. We got eggs.
I did. I got eggs twice and I got babies from one of those clutches. And I don't think I'm the only one who feels that those are more difficult, right? So going into that breeding, right? Emeralds I did by accident on the first time. I'll come out and admit it. I admit it to everybody. I had the male on a stick and he's looking at my face a little too tastily. And I was like, you no, settle down. And I just set him in the cage next to him, which was the females, because I put them side by side. That way pheromones can pass through when I'm doing my breeding cycling. And I was only putting them through a mock cycle just to see how the female was going to react. Was she going to ovulate? Is she going to do anything? Like, is there going to be any change in behavior? Because I was more so focused on green trees. I will hand to the Bible say I was a green tree guy before I was ever an emerald guy. I'm happy to say that I upgraded, but he's getting froggy. I put him in the cage. I changed his water. I changed the puppy pad in the bottom because I was still keeping them sterile at the time. And then I go back to back to the other cage to pull him out. Cage was open, sitting next to me the whole time. No privacy. And before I could get him to put him back in, he's locked with the female. And I went, I guess we're trying this. And I got babies that first year. I did do temperature cycling was all I did for them. I dropped the temperatures in the evening. I brought them back up in the morning. I started doing that. When did I breed them the first time? It wasn't even the proper like end of the year time and switching over. I ended up breeding them like over the summer because the way I have mine set up, I can cycle them any time of the year because everything stays pretty stable in my room, and then I can control the temperatures when I want. And I was knee deep trying to get the green trees to go. And so they were in the middle of a temperature cycling and he went for it. So boom, we got 11 babies that first year. And it was wonderful. The green trees I had to try 2 more years on. It was a 3-year process for me to get the green trees to go. I tried temperature cycling. Which is where you drop the temperatures in the evening and raise them back up in the morning and allow like that day night cycle that I normally get with my lights to kind of follow and do the same with my temperatures and drop them. I tried weather cycling, doing like differences in humidity and changes in how often I'm spraying. I had automatic misters on timers and everything to try and simulate monsoon season. And then I tried food cycling, where you take and you give them a long fast, and then you feed them more smaller prey items to kind of the theory is that you'll stimulate the female to think, oh, there's a bunch of small prey available. So now's a good time to have babies so that there's a lot of that available and they can eat and grow up, right? That didn't work either. It was only on the third year that when I tried all three, a kind of combination of all three of those, that I finally had success with the green trees. And every expert that I ever spoke to, and I know I'm kind of rambling on at this point, but every expert that I spoke to, the thing that they would come back to was like, listen, man, this is hard and it's okay to cry. This is difficult. And you can do everything right and don't feel bad like you did something wrong because you can do it all right and still not have success with them. So that was encouraging, but at the same time, I was quickly shifting over to my emeralds and going, y'all are easy. This is great. You guys are making this more difficult than it needs to
And,
be.
and we talk about it being easy, and to a degree it is, but there's a ton of people that buy emeralds,
Mm-hmm.
put them together, and go, I don't know why it's not working.
And I think that's probably mostly due to inappropriate housing to start,
Yeah.
right? It's one thing to have an animal feel comfortable enough to eat. It's another to have an animal like tolerate handling and like be willing to interact with you. It's an entirely different thing to get that female to ovulate and do her thing and be ready to breed. There needs to be a certain degree, I think, of limited interaction, right? You have to let them alone and to do their thing because if she doesn't feel comfortable, then she's not going to be interested. As much as your boy can push and prod and want to, because let's be honest, us guys are usually ready for it at any time. It's the females that got to be in the mood. And so I think there has to be some of that in order to get the breeding done. I
Yeah.
think you
And,
have to do some limited interacting with them,
and we
which more so leads into why wild caughts would be a little easier.
and that's why we've kind of, I think in a lot of ways, like I've always been more about the emeralds. I like boas personally.
Yeah.
And
No
we talk about our
incubation. It's nice.
yeah, we talk about our personal feelings towards them. They're both cool. There's no getting around
Great.
it. And for someone looking in to get into them from a breeding perspective, do a lot of research before you you buy them.
Yeah.
But as a
Find somebody
pet,
you can mentor with. That's the key.
I mean, without question. But if you're going to get one as a pet and you're not sure which one to go with, there's really no wrong choice.
Right.
They're both awesome. Me personally, and I think you're on a similar, but we both love the emeralds.
Yeah.
There's just something about them. They're thick, they're strong, they're elite. They're just cool.
I think they're the top of the line when it comes to
Yeah.
arboreal snakes for sure. I don't think that I think if you are newer to keeping reptiles, right, and you want to branch into the arboreal zone and do that nice setup and do some of the fancier things that you can do with an arboreal that we've discussed before, I think green trees between the two, if we're pitting
Yeah.
these head to head, green tree is going to give you a higher rate of success when it comes to being able to have an animal that is handleable and is going to establish easily, right? The emerald can be just as handleable as my green tree. In fact, I would say on a majority, my emeralds are more handleable than my one green tree. I have one that I've had since 2015, and he's a doll. I'd hand him to any kid, no problem, no questions. He's a great snake. My female, you've seen her. As soon as you open the door, she takes one swing out. She's looking for food. She's ready to go.
That's the one
Uh,
I'm thinking of.
this is the one that got you. I
Yeah.
can still reach in there and get her out, but the emeralds I think that I have are more handleable than her per se.
Yeah.
However, in the establishment zone, if you don't have the experience to be able to do force feeding or injections or medications that may come with a wild caught animal, because again, on that hobbyist level, we're most likely dealing with that. Green trees tend to establish better, and I feel like I've had more luck with wild caught green trees than emeralds. The emeralds have taken much more work to get established than the green trees have.
And that's part of it. Buying wild caught, getting it established, it's a lot of work. Our personal feelings towards which one, like you can't really go wrong. They're
Either
both
one.
awesome. Arboreals. If you want to get into morphs and you want to really dig in deep, green trees have a lot more options.
There
You know,
is.
there's and if you want to sell a $25,000 snake that's not a basin, you see crazy costs on green trees, these designers out there.
Right.
Emeralds just don't have that type of variety.
Not
I mean,
yet.
not yet. So maybe that's
Maybe
why
one day.
get in early. We're on the ground floor. It's been
Get it
40
on the
years and
ground
we're
floor
still
and start making stuff. We'll swap babies and we'll
yeah,
figure it
there's
out.
really only patternless anaconda phase,
Hmm.
high white, if you even want to call that anything.
Right.
And that's pretty much what you're working with northern emeralds. I mean,
Whereas in the green trees, you can go either direction. You can get involved in the lineage breeding,
mm,
where you stay specific to your localities, and there are some diehard people out there, love you guys, that are very strict about like you only breed Seronks to Seronks, and you only breed BX to BX. And I think there's something to that, right? Certain localities are going to hold different nuanced features to them. Certain ones are going to have more blue lining. Certain ones are going to have more high yellow. Certain ones are going to have more red babies versus yellow babies and things like that. And that can get really cool to work with. You have a lot of that variety inside the green
oh
tree
yeah.
realm, whether you're intending to breed them or not. Keeping a collection of these are all green tree pythons, yet they look wildly different is really cool to have. It kind of tickles that same like excitement that you get with other morphologies like ball pythons and boas and
I
things.
mean, there's no confusion. They're all tree pythons, but they're not all green.
Right.
I mean, I see some pop up and they're blue, all blue. From House of Blue
Hmm.
does those. We see with Socrates some of the stuff he produces down in Florida, and you're just like,
It's wild what
I
they're
mean,
working with.
not to put him on blast. I saw him on Morph Market with one for $9,000 today, and
Hmm.
I'm looking at this stunning snake. I mean, anyone that would look at that just goes, "What is that?"
Right.
it's a beautiful green tree python. Emeralds at the moment, we don't really have that with the northerns too much.
Hmm.
I mean, there are some people that have crazy looking pixelated ones, but none for sale. you
Right.
know,
And
green trees.
the funny thing with both of those species is that when you have babies, you have no idea what the adult form of that snake is going to look like. They're the wonder ball
Yeah.
of, what I wonder what's in a wonder ball. I wonder what this snake's going to look like when it grows up.
I mean, yeah,
So in
there's
order to find
yeah.
that, you've got to wait.
And we've had some variety. I know that the one clutch we got those, they're kind of more yellow
Hmm. I've
creeping
had
up
more
on them.
yellow ones than red ones. I had a couple of red ones
Yeah.
and then a couple of yellows, more yellow than, and they were a Biak cross. Don't come for me, guys. They were a Biak cross with my male who was an Aru Manakwari.
Man.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. An Aru Maruki cross. So he has some blue lining that's pretty around like his jaw and along down really nice blue flecking down the side of his body. And then that caudal luring tail, that coloration on his tail is bright blue. Whereas my female that went with him is like a high yellow biak. And I don't say that to mean that she's a designer morph. She was a wild caught individual. But she retained a lot of that yellow that she had from a youngster into her adulthood. And even to this day, I think I've had her 5 or 6 years now, and she's still holding that yellow,
Yeah, and that's
um, which I tend to notice more in the Beox. Again, that locality delineation.
and for a lot of people, that's what they really enjoy getting into and finding out the morphs, the lineage, the lines,
Hmm.
the localities, all these cool things. For me, it doesn't tickle my fancy as much. I just enjoy most of the emeralds that come out. I haven't kept up with a lot of the green tree python stuff because it's so in depth, but super similar snakes, and yet once you dig in, you see the massive difference in
There's
aesthetics that you can get.
quite a variation amongst like what comes out. There's certain snakes that are like they have cool names like Showstopper and other things that are incredible snakes, just wild pixelations and like granite
Oh,
colorations and really cool stuff. A good mentor of mine that I'd love to give a shout out to was Harlan Wall. Old school guy, doesn't do texting, doesn't do a lot of messaging. He will comment occasionally on Facebook, but he does phone calls, which was hard for me to get over because I hate making phone calls. But I finally broke down one day and like just called him, and every time I've spoken to him since, he just dumps like an infinite amount of knowledge. There's no way that I can retain every bit of things that he teaches me, but I've always learned something every time I've talked to him. And some of the green trees that he's working with that he's sent me are out of this world. Like, would love to get involved with that. But again, when we get started talking into we started about it earlier and we were talking about captive versus, right? When you get into captive animals, like on the level that we're working with them at, that changes the price significantly. You might find a green tree python at a pet store for, 350 for a real little baby. Something a little bigger might go closer to that $600. The moment that a baby captive is born, you're looking at like $1,500 for a first generation that doesn't have any like crazy designer genes in it, right? Then you go to anything that's designer and you're looking at $5,000 to $10,000. And then you go up from there and you get something that has already started to go through the color change and is showing some signs of being something cool. And you're going to pay exponentially more than that.
yeah, that's almost getting into the realm of most people who are probably listening to this podcast and getting into green trees would never spend $9,000
It would hurt
on
me
a
to
snake.
spend that much. I mean, don't tell me, don't get me wrong. I have spent that much on a snake before, but for the most part, it's way outside of the realm of. And the worst part is I've met people who have gone and bought. I don't know that it's the worst part. I think I misspoke when I said that. I've known people who've gone and bought $5,000 to $10,000 snakes because these are the parents and it's gonna look something like. And what happens? They end up with a green snake. Nothing wrong with that snake at all. It's a great snake. And it does retain the genetics for the possibility that generations from it will possibly turn out to something crazy. But if you're somebody who's investing in these animals not for the purpose of breeding, and you get it and you're expecting it to be something wild and crazy, and you end up, I could see how that would be a little disappointing,
Yeah,
right?
so I think in conclusion, buy an arboreal snake.
Of course, as
They're
always.
awesome. You can't go wrong. We'll sell you either.
Either one.
And if you go captive, if you can,
It's easier in the long run. And
yeah,
especially if you don't have somebody who can hover over and help you through all of those steps, or if you don't have the experience to know how to get through those initial hurdles yourself.
yeah.
Getting just spending a little bit more money and getting something that's well established from a reputable breeder, whether we have them or not, I can refer people to, and that's one of the things that I'm always happy to do is it's not about making it $1 million for me. It's about making sure that people have good experiences with these animals because those experiences are what keep our hobby and our passions alive. So if I can refer you to Harlan or Socrates or point you in the right direction of somebody who's got what you want, let's get it. Like let's make sure that we pass those around and get people who are excited about this out there and getting. But definitely go get an arboreal snake. Like
Oh yeah.
I'm here
We
for it.
we want to put an arboreal snake in the hands of every, red-blooded American. Everyone
That's
should
it.
have one.
That's it.
Uh,
Everybody should have one or two
and
or three.
2 or 3. I put my vote on the emeralds personally, but
Yeah.
I get excited every time I see a tree snake. So
Yeah. They bring about that childhood excitement of watching National Geographic or the History Channel
mhm.
and seeing something about the Amazon and then seeing those clips as they scroll them by the screen of the emeralds posted up on their perches and sitting there, those long tongue flicks and
Yeah.
slow methodical movements. It's amazing. And it's nice to have that in my house, right? And you have them in your
Yep.
house. It's an experience. And I think I've mentioned it before, but like one of the greatest compliments I ever got in my life was when somebody said, "Dude, I've only seen some of these animals on TV and you've got them in your house." And I was just like, "I know, right, dude?
Yeah.
This is awesome."
Yeah, get something that you're excited about, get something that you love, save up the money and get something really nice, and you will not have a bad experience.
Right. You'll have a much better opportunity to enjoy the animal, interact with them, and have like a better start off. And then for sure, like once you've got care down and you've got the caging locked tight and you want to start getting some more genetics and things and pulling, you want to start
Mhm.
breeding like we do, we can help with that too. And we'll help get you established.
Oh
Just
yeah.
don't put your wild caught animal in the same room as your captive bred stuff.
Oh,
You want to do
yeah,
some
we we
quarantine
we
first.
we could do a whole podcast on wild caught versus captive born arboreals because there's truly so many horror stories and so much that can happen.
Right.
But we don't
And
want to
it's not the case
discourage.
for everything, but we don't wanna again, we
Correct.
don't wanna discourage anybody.
Yeah. If you got to do it, try to find one that's been established already, regardless
Right.
of which way you're going. And if it doesn't say it's established and you can't talk to a person, it is not established. It is
Not
not eating.
established, it's not ready.
It is not eating any food, and they are trying to ship it to you as fast as possible.
Right. Yep.
So that's my conclusion to it.
Yep, and I think that the more people that we can get that word out to, the more people who will have good experiences with these animals, and we can break some of that stigma that surrounds them, whether it's about the biting, whether it's about the aggression, whether it's about the difficulty or they don't do well in captivity. I think we can break a lot of that, and that's part of the reason that I wanted to start doing these podcasts is to put what I already say at the shows and what I already preach to people in person is we can get it out further and get the word out that these snakes are here. They're going to keep being here. And it's our job as responsible keepers within the industry to educate our clientele that purchase from us and understand these animals in a way that we can keep them adequately and keep them happy.
Yep, it's all we can do.
That's all we can do. I think that's it. We're trying to keep down to time so that you guys can get and listen to these on your way to work or whenever you want to. So we're trying not to go overtime. So we're going to close this one out here, and then we will come back next week and do another podcast. So keep staying Valhalla bound. We appreciate you guys. You guys are the reason that we are doing this podcast is so that you can listen to and learn from us along our journey. So we really appreciate it. We'll see you guys next time.
All right. Oh, that was